The October sun cast long shadows across the familiar streets of Charlotte, North Carolina, as Stephen Curry pulled into the driveway of his childhood home. The house looked smaller than he remembered, weathered by time but still holding the warmth of countless memories. He'd come back to help his mother, Sonia, sort through old belongings before the big move to a smaller place. Just like riding a bike, Stephen muttered to himself, grabbing a box from the back seat. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the distant sound of children playing basketball echoing from somewhere down the street, a sound that instantly transported him back to his own youth. Sonia greeted him at the door with her characteristic warm smile, though Stephen noticed the slight fatigue in her eyes. At 57, she was still vibrant, but the recent divorce from Dell had taken its toll. "Thank you for coming, baby," she said, embracing him tightly. "I know how busy you are with the season starting. Nowhere else I'd rather be, Mom," Stephen replied, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the house's distinctive smell, a blend of wood polish and the lavender candles she'd always loved. They spent the morning sorting through boxes in the living room, each item triggering stories and laughter. Stephen found his old report cards, trophies from middle school tournaments, and even a pair of sneakers he'd worn holes through during his sophomore year. "I swear you grew 3 inches in these shoes." "Alone," Sonia laughed, holding up the battered Nikes. As the afternoon wore on, Stephen offered to tackle the attic, a space that had always seemed mysterious and slightly forbidden during his childhood. Armed with a flashlight and wearing an old Warriors t-shirt, he climbed the creaky wooden ladder. The attic was a time capsule of family history. Dust particles danced in the shafts of light filtering through a small window. Christmas decorations sat in neat rows, alongside boxes labeled in his mother's careful handwriting. Stephen's baby clothes, Seth's school projects, Seidel's dance costumes. It was behind a stack of these boxes that Stephen noticed something unusual. A small wooden chest he'd never seen before, partially hidden beneath an old quilt. Unlike everything else in the organized space, this seemed deliberately concealed. Curiosity overtook him. The chest was heavier than expected, made of dark cherry wood with brass hinges that had tarnished with age. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a leather photo album. Stephen's heart rate quickened as he opened it. The first few pages showed pictures he recognized: family vacations, birthday parties, moments from his teenage years. But as he turned deeper into the album, he found photographs that made him pause. There was his mother looking impossibly young, maybe 19 or 20. She was in what appeared to be a hospital room, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Stephen studied the image closely. The baby was tiny, fragile-looking, with wisps of dark hair visible beneath a knitted cap. He flipped the photo over. In his mother's handwriting, faded but still legible: "Michael James, March 15th, 1990. My beautiful boy." Stephen's hands began to tremble. March 15th, 1990. That was 2 years before he was born. He was born March 14th, 1988, in Akron, Ohio. This photo was taken in what looked like a hospital in Virginia, based on the visible signage in the background. More photos followed. The same baby, slightly older, maybe a few months. Sonia feeding him a bottle, her face radiant with love but tinged with something Stephen couldn't quite identify. Sadness? Fear? Then abruptly, the photos of this baby stopped. The next section showed familiar images again. Stephen as a toddler, family photos he'd seen countless times, but now they felt different, incomplete. His mind raced. Who was Michael James? Why had his mother never mentioned him? Stephen carefully closed the album, his hands shaking slightly as he climbed down from the attic. Sonia was in the kitchen, packing dishes into newspaper when Stephen appeared in the doorway, still holding the album. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." The look in her eyes when she saw the album told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or a simple explanation. This was the secret she'd been carrying for 25 years. "Oh, Stephen," she whispered, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs. "I always wondered when this day would come." The kitchen fell silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock that had marked time in this house for over 2 decades. Sonia's hands trembled as she reached for the album, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover with the tenderness of someone touching a sacred relic. "Sit down, baby," she said softly, gesturing to the chair across from her. "This is going to be hard to hear." Stephen remained standing, his athlete's instincts keeping him on edge, ready for flight or fight. "Mom, who is Michael James?" Tears began to well in Sonia's eyes, but she maintained her composure, the same strength she'd shown throughout his childhood, through every challenge and triumph. "Michael James was your older brother," she said, her voice barely audible. "My firstborn son." The words hit Stephen like a physical blow. He gripped the back of the chair, his knuckles white. "I have a brother? Had a brother." "Mom, what?" "Please, just let me tell you the whole story," Sonia interrupted gently. "I owe you that much." She opened the album to the first photo, her finger hovering over the image of herself as a young mother. "I was 21 when I had Michael. Your father and I had been together for 3 years, but we weren't married yet. This was 1990, and things were different then, more complicated." Stephen finally sat down, his mind struggling to process this revelation. "Where is he now?" Sonia closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "He died when he was 4 months old. Sudden infant death syndrome." The air seemed to leave the room. Stephen felt his chest tighten, a mix of grief for a brother he'd never known and anguish for his mother's hidden pain. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but why didn't you ever tell us? Why keep it a secret all these years?" Sonia turned the page to show more photos. Dell holding the baby, looking young and overwhelmed, family members Stephen didn't recognize gathered around a tiny casket covered in white flowers. "The grief nearly destroyed me," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And your father?" Dell handled it differently. He wanted to move forward, start fresh. "When I got pregnant with you 2 years later, he made me promise we'd never talk about Michael again. He said it would only bring sadness to our new family." Stephen felt anger rising in his chest, not at his mother, but at the circumstances that had forced her to carry this burden alone. "But Mom, that wasn't fair to you. You shouldn't have had to." "I made the choice, Stephen," Sonia said firmly. "Right or wrong, I made the choice to honor your father's wishes. But not a day went by that I didn't think about Michael. Not a single day." She turned to another section of the album, revealing something that made Stephen's breath catch. There were photos of him as a baby, but interspersed were images that looked like memorial services, flowers, and what appeared to be a small grave marker. "Every year on his birthday, I would visit Michael's grave. I'd tell him about you and Seth and Seidel. I'd tell him about your games, your achievements, your dreams. I'd tell him how proud I was of all my children, including him." Stephen's eyes filled with tears. "You did this alone?" "For years, yes. Your father knew, but we had an understanding that I wouldn't involve the family. It was my way of coping, my way of keeping Michael's memory alive without disrupting the life we were building." The weight of this revelation settled over Stephen like a heavy blanket. All those times his mother had seemed distant during certain periods, all those unexplained absences she'd attributed to errands or appointments. She'd been visiting the grave of his brother. "There's more," Sonia said quietly, turning to the final section of the album. "When you started playing basketball seriously, when you began to show real talent, I used to sit by Michael's grave and imagine what it would have been like if he'd been there cheering you on too." The last photo in the album was recent, maybe taken within the last few years. It showed Sonia at a cemetery, placing flowers on a small headstone that read, "Michael James Curry, March 15th, 1990, July 22nd, 1990, forever in our hearts." "I took this photo the day you won your first championship," she said. "I wanted to share that moment with him too." Stephen could no longer hold back his emotions. Tears streamed down his face as he reached across the table to take his mother's hands. "Mom, I can't imagine carrying this alone for so long. But why now? Why show me this now?" Sonia squeezed his hands, her own tears flowing freely. "Because I'm tired of secrets, baby. Because with everything that's happened with your father and me, I realized life is too short to keep hiding pieces of ourselves from the people we love most. The kitchen had grown dark around them as evening approached, but neither Stephen nor Sonia moved to turn on the lights. The fading daylight filtering through the windows seemed appropriate for the weight of the conversation they were sharing. Stephen stared at the photo of Michael's grave, trying to process the reality that he'd had a brother who had existed for 4 brief months before Stephen was even conceived. The mathematical precision of his basketball mind kept trying to organize the timeline, but his heart was struggling to catch up. "Does anyone else know?" he asked finally, his voice hoarse from emotion. Sonia wiped her eyes with a dish towel, the same one she'd used to clean his scraped knees and dry his tears as a child. "Your grandmother knew, of course. She was there when Michael was born, and she was there when we lost him. She's the one who helped me take care of everything when your father couldn't." "Grandma knew all these years and never said anything?" "I asked her not to. She respected my wishes, even though I know it was hard for her too. She loved Michael deeply in those few months we had him." Stephen thought about his grandmother, who had passed away 3 years earlier. All those times she'd held him a little longer than necessary. All those moments when she'd look at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Now it made sense. What about Seth and Siddle? "They don't know," Sonia admitted. "And that's been the hardest part, keeping this from all of you. But your father was adamant, and I was so broken back then, I didn't have the strength to fight him on it." Stephen stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the backyard where he'd spent countless hours practicing his shot. The basketball hoop was still there, weathered and slightly tilted, but still standing. "I used to wonder sometimes," he said, not turning around, "why you seemed so protective of us. More protective than other parents. I thought it was just because Dad traveled so much with his career." "Losing Michael changed me," Sonia said quietly. "I became terrified of losing any of you. Every fever, every late night you didn't come home, every time you were on the court, I was always holding my breath, waiting for something terrible to happen." Stephen turned back to face her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's why you were so worried when I had those ankle injuries early in my career. You weren't just worried about basketball. I was terrified of losing another son," she confirmed. "It was irrational, I know, but grief doesn't follow logic." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what had been shared. Stephen picked up the album again, studying the photos of his mother with Michael. She looked so young, so hopeful in those early pictures. "Can I ask, what was he like in those 4 months?" Sonia's face lit up for the first time since they'd started talking. "He was beautiful, Stephen. He had the most alert eyes, like he was taking in everything around him. He was a good baby, slept well, hardly ever cried. He loved when I would sing to him." "What did you sing?" "The same songs I sang to you and Seth and Siddle. Amazing Grace was his favorite. He would just stare at me with those big eyes, like he understood every word." Stephen felt his throat tighten again. "I wish I could have known him." "In some ways, you do," Sonia said gently. "Every time you show kindness to someone, every time you help a teammate, every time you use your platform to make a difference, I see Michael in those actions. I believe he's been watching over all of you." "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Do you regret keeping this secret for so long?" Sonia considered the question carefully, her fingers still tracing the edges of the photo album. "I regret that I didn't have the courage to stand up to your father about it. I regret that you're finding out this way instead of me choosing the right time to tell you. But I don't regret protecting you and your siblings from the pain when you were young. You deserved childhoods filled with joy, not shadowed by grief. But we could have supported you, Mom. We could have helped you carry this. You did support me, baby. Every success, every moment of happiness you brought into this house, that supported me more than you'll ever know. Watching you grow up, watching you achieve your dreams, that was healing for me." Stephen moved his chair closer to his mother's, taking her hands in his again. "I want to visit his grave. I want to meet my brother." Fresh tears spilled down Sonia's cheeks. "I was hoping you'd say that. And I think Seth and Siddle should know too. This is their brother too." Sonia nodded slowly. You're right. It's time for our family to be whole again, even if it means acknowledging the piece that's been missing. As if summoned by their conversation, Stephen's phone buzzed with a text from Seth. How's the packing going? Need help? Tomorrow? Stephen showed his mother the message. Should I tell him to come over tonight? Not yet, Sonia said. Let me process this a little more. Let me figure out how to tell them. This is going to be a shock for them too. We'll do it together, Mom. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. For the first time in hours, Sonia smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. You know what? I feel lighter already. 25 years is a long time to carry a secret. Too long, Stephen agreed. But we're going to make this right. We're going to honor Michael's memory the way it should have been honored all along. 2 weeks later, Stephen found himself standing in East Lawn Memorial Gardens, a quiet cemetery about 30 minutes from his childhood home. The October morning was crisp, with golden leaves scattered across the well-maintained grounds. Beside him stood Seth and Sidel, both still processing the revelation their mother had shared just days before. Sonia walked, slightly ahead of them, carrying a bouquet of white roses. Michael's flowers, she had explained. She moved with the familiarity of someone who had made this journey many times before, but today felt different. Today, she wasn't alone. It's just up here, she said softly, leading them along a winding path lined with oak trees. Stephen had spent the past 2 weeks trying to prepare himself for this moment, but nothing could have readied him for the sight of the small headstone nestled beneath a flowering dogwood tree. Michael James Curry, March 15, 1990. July 22, 1990. Forever in our hearts. The grave was beautifully maintained, with fresh flowers that couldn't have been more than a few days old. A small angel statue sat beside the headstone, and Stephen realized this was where his mother had been channeling her grief and love for 25 years. "Oh, Mom," Sidel whispered, immediately understanding the weight of what they were witnessing. As the only daughter, she had always been particularly close to Sonia, and now she understood some of the sadness she'd sometimes glimpsed in her mother's eyes. Seth, ever the practical one, was studying the dates on the headstone. 4 months, he said quietly. He was just a baby. He was your big brother, Sonia said, kneeling to place the roses against the stone. And I know he would have loved all of you so much. Stephen knelt beside his mother, placing his hand on the cool granite. Hey, Michael, he said, feeling slightly awkward but determined to make this connection. I'm Stephen. I wish I could have met you. What happened next surprised everyone. Seth and Seidel both knelt as well, and suddenly they were all gathered around their brother's grave like they'd done this 1,000 times before. We brought you something, Sidel said, pulling a small basketball from her purse, a miniature version of the balls Stephen had signed for countless fans. Stephen thought you might like this. Sonia watched through tears, as her 3 living children placed the ball beside the flowers. In that moment, she felt a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced in 25 years. I used to come here after your games, she told Stephen. I'd sit right here and tell Michael all about how you played, what you did well, what Coach said. I'd tell him about Seth's performances, and Sidel's achievements too. You never missed a game in high school, Stephen remembered. Even when Dad was traveling, you were always there. Because I was representing all of us, Sonia explained. I was there for Michael too. They spent an hour at the grave, sharing stories and asking questions. Sonia told them about Michael's short life, how he'd smiled early, how he'd gripped their fingers with surprising strength, how Del had initially been over the moon about being a father. What happened to Dad? Seth asked the question they'd all been thinking. Why did he want to pretend Michael never existed? Sonia sighed, choosing her words carefully. Your father was young, and he was scared. Losing Michael devastated him, but he dealt with it by trying to move forward and forget. He thought that was the healthiest thing for our family. But it wasn't healthy for you, Sidel observed. No, it wasn't. But I understood his reasoning, even if I didn't agree with it. We were both just trying to survive our grief in different ways. As they prepared to leave, Stephen made a decision that surprised even him. Mom, I want to do something for Michael. Something public. What do you mean? I want to establish a foundation in his name, something that helps families who lose infants or supports SID's research. I want his life to have meant something beyond just our family. Sonia's hand flew to her chest. Stephen, you don't have to. I want to. We all do. He looked at Seth and Sidel, who nodded immediately. Michael was our brother. His memory deserves more than just secret visits and hidden photo albums. The Michael James Curry Foundation, Seth said, trying out the name. I like it. We could do fundraising events, partner with hospitals, raise awareness, Sidel added, her mind already working through the possibilities. For the first time since they'd arrived at the cemetery, Sonia broke down completely. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief, of joy, of finally being able to honor her son's memory the way she'd always wanted to. He would love this, she said through her tears. He would love knowing that his life inspired something beautiful. 3 months later, Stephen stood at a podium in the Golden State Warriors practice facility, surrounded by family, teammates, and media. The Michael James Curry Foundation was officially launching, with a mission to support families affected by infant loss and fund research into SIDS prevention. Today, I want to tell you about my older brother, Michael, Stephen began, his voice steady and clear. He only lived for 4 months, but his impact on our family, and now I hope on countless other families, will last forever. In the audience, Sonia sat between Seth and Sidel, holding a photo of Michael that was no longer hidden away, but displayed proudly for the world to see. After 25 years of carrying her secret alone, she was finally able to share her son's story. My mother taught me that love doesn't end when someone dies, Stephen continued. It transforms into something else, into action, into purpose, into hope for others. Michael's love has been transforming our family for 25 years, and now we want to share that transformation with the world. The foundation would go on to raise millions of dollars, support thousands of families, and fund groundbreaking research. But more than that, it would ensure that Michael James Curry's brief life had a lasting impact on the world, just as his secret existence had shaped his family for a quarter-century. As Stephen concluded his remarks, he looked directly at his mother and smiled. "Mom, we're finally whole," he said. "All of us." In that moment, Sonia felt something she hadn't felt since July 22, 1990. Complete peace. Her secret was no longer a burden, but a bridge, connecting her past to her present, and creating a legacy that would extend far into the future. Michael James Curry had finally come home,